Last people still entering the room, that's fine. Hello. So, hello everyone to this ÖFG Peaceful Change lecture. It is entitled Global Terrorism Report 2025. And allow me to introduce today's speaker to you. And then I want to say a few things about the Global Terrorism Report as well. So our speaker today is Steve Killelea. And he wears lots and lots of different hats. So really an astonishing career as an IT entrepreneur, high technology. If I understood that correctly, when I use my bank card, then some of your software may have something to do with it, right?
Yep, that's exactly correct.
And but he's much more than that. He is a film producer. He is an author, and he is a global philanthropist. And as such, he is particularly interested in issues of peace and sustainable development. So both topics actually very fitting, I think, with what we do here at the Vienna School of International Studies and with what we do in terms of our lecture series. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things on his CV. In 2007, so almost 20 years ago, he founded the Institute for Economics and Peace, which is a very renowned think tank. And the think tank does really fantastic things. So I use their work all the time. So there are, most importantly, perhaps for me as researcher, there are all kinds of indices that were put together. One of them is on terrorism. Steve is going to talk about this today. Another one is on peace. So simply a measure of peace, telling you on a quite a complex measurement how much peace there is in certain countries, in certain world regions, and so on. Steve has also founded the Charitable Foundation, which does fantastic work, providing life-changing programs to some of the poorest communities in the world. And his work is not only used, and the research is not only used by people like me when I write my books, and by all kinds of other scholars, but also by international organizations, United Nations, for instance, as well, because obviously it is very important to get the facts right. Yeah. So when we talk about peace, or when we talk about terrorism, we actually have to know what is actually happening in the world, and Steve has done really a great service there, helping us to understand what's actually going on in the world. I could go on and on now with my praise, but I just stop here, and maybe a big round of applause. Steve, welcome to Vienna.
Well, great. Look, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you, Marcus, for all those kind words. It always sounds a little bit funny when you hear people talking about yourself, but it's your life, you live it. It's something which just has a flow to it, and things seem to happen. And part of that is why I'm here today talking to you people. So do you want me to start presenting, or do we just want me to talk? We'll just launch straight into it. Okay, great. So this is a very fast-paced presentation. So basically we develop the index, the Global Terrorism Index. We've been releasing that every year for the last 12 years. The other major product we have is the Global Peace Index, which Marcus has already referred to. We've been doing that for just about 20 years now. So without more to do, I'll just start to launch into it, I think. So the Institute for Economics and Peace was set up to understand the intersection between business, peace and economics, places special emphasis on metrics to measure peace, and then to ascribe an economic value to changes in peace. Situated around the world, we have 6 different offices, headquartered in Sydney, Australia. We have offices in Nairobi, Mexico City, New York, Brussels and Den Haag. We have wide range of partners we work with. So the work, just some of it, for example. So we work with multiple different agencies with the UN. We do contract research from them, as well as they use our work in many, many different ways. We've had organisations like Rotary International standardise all their peace work globally, based on our studies of positive pieces, which this creates peace. Had people like Philippines government now rolling out a lot of our work throughout the country. They've standardised again on this positive peace as the framework for national unity and their approaches to peace. Even organisations like World Vision have standardised on it to use it in all the projects which they have dealing in conflict zones. And we have a whole range of reports. So here's just 6 of them. As I mentioned, the Global Peace Index. We've got also an ecological threat report, which looks at where the major ecological threats are. The biggest areas of conflict also have the worst ecological outcomes. And as we move into the Terrorism Index, and the countries in the worst terrorism are also in conflict, and also have high levels of ecological degradation. I'll just keep moving on. Okay, so that's enough of the advertisements. So now I'll stop promoting and move into the presentation. So this is a quick mud map of the world. If you're looking at it, green is very, very good. Red is very, very bad. And so one of the things you might notice is that Europe is fairly much in the mid-zone. Now, if we look at Africa, the epicentre of terrorism is in the Sahel. That's the red, which you can see across there. But you'll also find there's a lot of blue. 44 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, 22 of them haven't had a terrorist attack in the last 5 years. Now, I'll just run through some of the key findings. So if we're looking at the number of deaths from terrorism, was 7,555. That's roughly the same as the prior year. That's after deducting away the Hamas attack on October the 7th, which is the largest single attack since 9/11 in 2000. So to get understand, you've got to do that. Now, attacks decreased by 3%. But when we're looking at Myanmar and we subtract out Myanmar, because there's this huge reduction in it, then we found attacks went up 8%. So the headline figures are better than the underlying situation. But now we'll move into the guts of it. But if we're looking at it, what we find is the number of countries which suffered from a terrorist attack went up by 8 to 66. So that's about a 15% increase. 45 countries deteriorated compared to only 34 which improved. That's the worst outcome for 7 or 8 years. Now, 98% of terrorist attacks occur in a conflict zone. So that's a really, really important figure, because if you want to stop terrorism, you need to solve conflicts. But if we look today, there are 69 major conflicts going globally. That's where more than 25 people killed. That's more that's more conflicts than at any stage since the end of the Second World War. Now, on top of that, 91 countries actually are engaged in a conflict beyond their borders. That's the most since we started the Global Peace Index 20 years ago. And we can see the conflicts aren't being solved. In the 1970s, 49% finished with a victory, 23% with a peace agreement. The 2010s, 9% finished with an outright victory, 4%. Only 4% finished with a peace agreement. Now, the 4 deadliest terrorist groups in the world, they killed 11% more people than what they did in the prior year. So their activities are actually increasing. So that's Islamic State, it's JNIM, Al-Shabaab and TTP. Now, TTP in Pakistan is the fastest growing organisation. Number of people it killed went up by 90%. Now, when we look at the West, we're now starting to see a resurgence of terrorism in the West. And this has been coming down every year for the last 7 years. Now it's going back up. So we're finding 7 Western countries in the worst 50 on the index now. 93% of deaths in the West are now caused by lone actors, not terrorist organisations like Islamic State. And they're 3 times more likely to be successful than if it's an organised plot. That's for a bunch of reasons I'll come back to later. Islamic State and its affiliates, and now Islamic State doesn't actually exist as an organisation. You've got this loosely based group of networked affiliates, but they're the deadliest group in the world. And they are active in 22 countries. That was 1 more than the prior year. So now if we look at the Sahel, that's the area of the world most affected. It counts for over half the deaths from terrorism. And that's actually 51% to be precise. And when we're looking in there, what we can see, Western influences and African influences waning. It may start to change in the next 3 or 4 months. Burkina Faso now is starting to reach out for some help in different areas because they find they haven't been able to get on top of the terrorism. But that slack has been picked up by Russia and to a less extent China. Burkina Faso is the country which is most impacted. It did have a fall of 57% in the number of attacks, and deaths were down 21%, but that doesn't mean much. JNIM now controls 60% of the territory in the country, and once you've got control of the territory, you don't have as much conflict because you're in control. You're in control. So this doesn't mean much, and we also know with Niger 3 years ago it had a massive drop in the number of deaths. This year the number of deaths have gone up 94%. A fifth of all terrorist deaths is still happening in Burkina Faso, and it's followed now by Pakistan in Syria, which we'll come back to. Now, the largest increases, as I mentioned, were Niger, 94%, and Pakistan at 45%. This will give you an idea of where the attacks have actually happened globally. And so the larger the circle, the bigger the attack, the more intense the red, the more deaths which have occurred there. So it's again, a very, very simple heat map. Now, we look at the 10 countries which have been most affected. These are what they are. So Burkina Faso, we said, is worst, followed by Pakistan, Syria. Now, you'll note every one of those countries is actually involved in conflict. Every one. And when we're looking at the spread of terrorism too, the spread of it's really tight. So we take the 10 countries which have got the most deaths from terrorism, and what we'll find, they'll account for 86% of all deaths. The 14% are now spread in the rest of the world. So I've got 66 countries affected, and you take 10 countries off that, 14% spread through the 56. Now, these are the countries which have improved the most. Israel, and that's because of the drop from the Hamas attack, which was 1,200 people killed. Burkina Faso, but I think that's probably, you need to wait and see. Myanmar, but again, it's still engaged in civil war. One of the projects I'm involved in is with a monk school inside Mandalay. We got a request for $5,000 from them about 4 months ago. So the rebels had now got within 20 k's of Mandalay, and they were worried that they wouldn't have enough food, so they wanted a few $1,000s to buy food and stockpile it for the 10,000 kids which they feed. Now, if we're looking here, this gives you an idea of where it's increasing. So as I mentioned, Niger, 94%, the biggest increase. But note Russia and Iran. That's the Khashoggi chapter of Islamic State, which we'll come back to a little bit further on. Now, JNIM is the fastest growing terrorist group in the world, almost non-existent in 2016, and today it's pretty much right over the Sahel. Now it's expanding westward, so we can see Togo had 52 deaths. So Togo, that's the worst deaths from terrorism they've had in their history, and that's JNIM expanding in. So the kind of things that will happen is there'll be a drought, or you get floods and there's no decent water. They take the water out of Burkina Faso and they'll bring it in to create relationships with the locals in those areas. Now, this gives you an idea of Europe. This just looks back over the last couple of years, and just give you the comparison. So if we look from 23 to 24, all indicators deteriorate except the number killed. So there was one person less killed this year. But if we look at it, the injured were up dramatically, hostages were up, and incidences were up from 34 to 67. Germany suffered the most fatalities, and that was 10, followed by Turkey, then the United Kingdom and Poland. But if we look at the attacks are somewhat similar. Germany had the most at 11, Greece next at 11, France had 9, Sweden 8, Turkey 7. And most of these, just about all of them, were lone wolf attacks. In fact, 91% of all the deaths in the West are caused by a lone wolf. So let's have a look at a few of the long-term trends now. So it's what we've found since about 2018. It's fluctuated in really quite a narrow band, running from about 6,800 to 7,400. So that's really pretty tight. That's 10%. So that's really quite tight. Now, since 2018, the largest increases have been in Burkina Faso, Niger and Pakistan. There's 10 different groups active in Pakistan now committing terrorism. And we saw just the other day there was an attack there by the Boshalan army, which took a train and then sort of killed 14 people and had a whole lot of hostages in there. That's just another example of it growing there. Largest improvements we've been in since 2018 were Afghanistan, Iraq and Somalia. Iraq now has about 1% of the deaths which it recorded a decade ago. That's a massive improvement. Afghanistan, we only count terrorist attacks by non-state actors. So once the Taliban takes control of Afghanistan, it's no longer counted as a terrorist group. Now, in the West, if we go back, attacks peaked there in about 2017 and fell every year up until 2024. Now they've increased by 60% this year. Now, anti-Semitic and Islamophobic incidences have surged since the start of the Gaza war. You can see it in Europe, Australia and the US. That's one of the underlying drivers which we can see with the increases in terrorism. And as long as the war continues, it'll go up. So if we look after the first 2 months after the start of the war and we went to the US and we look at hate instances, what we can see is they've increased by about 270% for anti-Semitic and they're up 300 for anti-Islamic phobia or Islamic phobia instances. If we look at the deaths from terrorism, this will give you an idea. Now, if you look at that very, very thin little maroon line at the top, that's deaths in the West. So the West is a loosely grouped, it's Eastern, Western Europe, also include the UK in that. You've got Canada, you've got Australia, you've got the US, New Zealand. So that's sort of the definition of the West. Now have a look at the next bar under it. That's the Sahel. That's the blue bar. And you can see the massive increase since about 2009. Again, if you come back to Iraq, it's the bright yellow one. We can see the changes in there as well. So you can see just how it's gone from being the peak. What you've got to realise is that terrorism's very, very dynamic. The shape changes very regular every year. Every year it's really quite different, unlike a lot of other types of violence. But if you look at the grey bar at the bottom and you subtract out these other categories at the top, what you'll find is that there's an underlying level of terrorism which has just been right there in the whole time we've been doing these indexes. Now we're looking at terror attacks in the West by motivation, so let's give you an idea of motivation. You can see from the peak in 2017 when the Islamic State had a whole lot of territory in the Levant region, you can see the change. Now the other thing is if you look at the little light grey bar at the top, and so what you can see when you hit 2014, that's undetermined. And that comes back to lone wolves and their style and the way they operate, because it's a lot of the time they're radicalising online. They're quite often picking up contradictory different philosophies which they'll then work into their own worldview. And so they might pick up conspiracy theories on one angle, maybe different styles of conspiracy theories, and then combine it with maybe an ideology from Islamic State. Now, this gives you an idea of the changes in the attacks in the West. Again, you can see ideologically motivated, group motivated, and again, the grey bar is unknown. So the shape of terrorism has changed dramatically from about 2017. And again, this gives an idea of just this changing landscape with terrorism. Now, we'll talk a little bit about homegrown terrorists or lone wolves, is the way a lot of people would refer to them. So only 8% of attacks in the West were actually carried out by a group. The rest were lone wolves. Yeah, 92%. Most people in their head thinking of Islamic State and organised attacks. Radicalisation is now happening more rapidly. So if you went back to 2002, which is almost ancient, over 20 years ago, it took 16 months on average for someone to radicalise. By 2015, that had dropped by 60% down to 10 months, and today they're actually now seeing it happening within weeks. Now, there's a whole range of reasons for this, and this comes back to the political landscape which is occurring within the West at the moment. A lot of them are isolated, they don't have a lot of friends. They've generally got a dislike for society. Sometimes they've got grievances. Those grievances can be real, and sometimes the grievances are perceived. Mental illness gets mixed into it. They don't have much, unlike the people in this room, they don't have much opportunity in their lives. So they're pretty looking for meaning and looking for purpose. And by attaching to an ideology, even if it's built in their own head and not particularly well built, it gives them a sense of meaning and purpose. And sometimes it's just to lash out at society. Now, when we're looking at it, the opportunities to radicalise are really diverse. So you can do it through social media, many different ways there. Gaming platforms are now a mechanism which people seek to recruit in. You've got a whole range of fringe forums. And then they can, once they get picked up by someone and cultivated, they can move into encrypted acts and into the dark web. Now, the number of attacks by youth, that's someone under 18, is on the increase. So in the UK, 42%, according to the Home Office, last year were youths. And we look at the attacks in Vienna, they were 17 and 19, and we can see the patterns occurring. So 1 in every 5 attacks in Europe is committed by a youth. Now, this is really difficult for intelligence organisations to uncover because the footprint's minimal. They quite often radicalise alone. There's a shorter time frame in which they're radicalising to get them, and then there's no trace of the financing. So with a group, you've got a group, they're interacting with a whole lot of people. They might have someone they're contacting overseas. They'll need money to plan and do a sophisticated attack. So intelligence agencies can pick up on that. So the two things which you'd see, one is you're looking at radical material, and two, you're looking at a lot of violent videos. Now, the problem is that a lot of people will look at radical content and a lot of people will look at violent videos, but it's another step to actually commit violence. So like, I watched Gladiator 2 on the plane on the way over here. So, not that I read radical material. Okay. Now, if we're looking at it, this gives you an idea of just the changes of lone wolf attacks over time. And so this is looking at fatal attacks. As I said, 91% of all people killed in the West were committed by a lone wolf. And again, so if we look at you can see the changes in this from about 2017. So this really is a major trend. Now, one of the things we can see is the profile of the kind of people who commit an act of terrorism. It's pretty much the same as the profile of someone who commits a mass killing. And so we can see that mass killings, if we're looking at them, the trend line over time, that's on the rise. Now, they're also, lone wolves, likely to be much more likely to be successful, as I've mentioned. So this will give you an idea of when we're looking at groups, how many of them actually get foiled. And that's again because they leave a large footprint, and the intelligence agencies are pretty good at it. When we're looking at the ones which are foiled compared to the ones which are launched by lone wolf, don't get many of them at all. But that is the major form of attack. So now the epicentre of terrorism in the world is in the Sahel. So let's come over there. So 51% of all terrorist deaths occurred in the Sahel. And we can see that the Western influence is declining. Russia is on the increase. And China's influence is growing also. So for Russia, it's a very simple business model which they're using in the Sahel. And so basically they go in and provide a Praetorian Guard for the leaders, so that's key man insurance, if you like. What they do then is they've got excellent ways of being able to gather intelligence on any competitors within the society, and now they can help the government plan what to do. And then propaganda. They're very, very good at producing propaganda in terms of supporting the rulers as well. Now, all this stuff's pretty cheap. So in exchange, you've got this massive vein of gold running through Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger. And so in return, Russia's got access to that and other minerals as well. So other minerals like copper, for example. There's a lot of copper in the area as well. So they get access to these other minerals. They then take that back to Russia. And like in the case of the gold, that provides them with the foreign income to prop up their reserves and help their war effort. On the other hand, you find that there's lots of other activity which are going on. So if we're looking at Russia, also, they were very, very effective in creating a propaganda campaign against France. And they used terrorism as the basis for that. So now what we can see is attacks on gold mines are up 300% in the last few years. And that's because everyone's vying for the access. Now, this is part of a larger conflict. 25,000 deaths last year. That's the most we've had on record in conflict for the Sahel, of which just under 5,000 were terrorist deaths. Again, it comes back to complex issues. You've got governments which are really, really, really got poor governance, very incompetent. You've got a lot of pastoral conflicts going on. So quite often groups like JNIM or others will jump in on that, take one side, and then that way use it as a mechanism to get in, gain support and take over territory. You've got extensive ecological degradation, which only aggravates the conflict over resources. These result in a whole range of economic issues. Security forces aren't liked, but security forces have done a lot of abuses, extrajudicial killings. They come into area people they think might be associated with JNIM or a criminal group. Then also come in and they'll hit a village which they think will be supportive, and then they'll just take anything of any value out of it. And then over the top of that, you've got the jihadists. Then over the top of that, again, transnational interests. So it's complicated. So now, the mineral wealth is big. Most of it's done through alluvial mining. It's individuals doing the mining. JNIM then takes money to allow them to mine, but it doesn't actually take the gold. It lets others transport the gold out, and then they charge a tax to move through the area. But they'll also with guns, drugs and people through the areas using exactly the same format. One of the things most people don't realise is Niger has 7% of the world's uranium exports. 7%. Europe 25% of the uranium you get comes out of Niger. Now, most of that's for France, so that is disappearing because that now is under the auspice of China and Russia. Now, just to give you an idea of just how bleak this is, if we look at the number of deaths, that's up 1,000% since 2019, 10 times larger. And JNM is the dominant group. Islamic State of West Africa, that's on the decline. Its number of deaths it caused last year were down 46%. So JNM pretty much controls it now. Now, to give you again an idea of just the way this has changed over the time. And you can see how the rest of the world, it's actually been coming along pretty well, other than a few countries. The Sahel is where it's increasing. So again, it just drives it home. And if we're looking at the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, not so bad. Not so bad. So of the 44 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, 22 of them didn't have a terror instance in the last 5 years. This will give you an idea of just the spread through the Sahel and where the deaths are actually occurring. So you can see it's really around other than Nigeria, where you got active with Boko Haram up around the borders of Chad and Niger, we find that it's really with the northern end of Burkina Faso, which is now pretty much all JNL territory, and along the borders. So the borders generally are the ones which it's hardest for governments to control the space. But one of the interesting things, so when you look at the approval rating in the Sahel, what you find is that America's not doing too bad. Not doing too bad. And you can see this. So if we're looking at it, we can see the US, of the 10 countries there, only 3 of them, its approval rating's actually gone down. And for Russia, only 1. Interesting. But with America withdrawing from the global stage, they're probably not going to be able to capitalise on that, are they? Now, let's give you an idea of changes in sentiment. So what we do is we track media sentiment. That gives an idea of just sort of the direction which countries are moving in towards their international relations. We might pick that one up later when we have a chat. So you can see this. You can see the Sahel towards France, the negativity going up, and you can see France towards the Sahel, negativity also going up. Come back a little bit on Islamic State. It's the most deadliest group. It killed 1,800 people, and it's much higher because a lot of the attacks are unattributed. So we've got a mechanism for attributing the attacks. Using that, the number of deaths will be 60% higher. And as mentioned earlier on, it operates as the decentralised network of affiliates. So there's no single head, so you can't really get at it. And they're fluid. People move around the world through these different groups quite fluidly. And active in 22 countries. The 2 countries where they're most active is Syria and the DRC. So DRC, it's up along the northern western border, bordering Uganda, there's about 100 groups now operating inside the DRC, different militias which are fighting over mineral wealth. It's all over mineral wealth. Now, Syria alone accounted for 280 of the 469 attacks. So you may have seen that HTS have now formed government in Syria. They've now, just in the last week, taken the SDF forces, which are the Kurdish forces up in the north, and they're bringing them back into the government. So there's also a US base in that territory, and that bordered the area where Islamic State's most active. So we think what that'll mean now is the Turkey will probably stop attacking the Kurds. The army, which the SDF, which the Kurds have got, is going to merge into the new Syrian government, and so that means there's probably likely to be a strong focus on the Islamic State in that area. But they've got something like 40,000 people, which are ex-fighters, and their families are either in jail or in refugee camps in the area. The Cautions chapter of Islamic State has grown rapidly. It was active in one country in 2021. It's now up to 5. And it's active in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, Russia, and through Central Asia. And they're 2 of the most deadly attacks in year 2024 in Iran, Russia, occurred through the Cautions chapter. Now, so those countries involved in war, they pull resources out, which now use, particularly intelligence resources, which they use in the war in which they're engaged. And we can see that there were 24 plots foiled by Islamic State. They've been ranging from Iran to Russia to Sweden. Now, Islamic State, this will give you an idea of where they operated. These are each of the different chapters. They have 9 individual chapters which we follow, and you could break them down into more. Deaths attributed to Islamic State by country. This will give you an idea. You can see the huge peak in Iraq and Syria when they had territory and were creating their state in the Levant region. We can see how that's changed over time. One of the things it's exceptionally good at is propaganda. So it's now active with the propaganda now in 9 different languages. And what you'll find interesting here is they do it in English, but none of it's in French and none of it's in Spanish, so their thrust is really over into these areas where they think they're more likely to be able to get followers into the Central Asia. Now, I'm just going to finish with this, and I started with it, but I'm going to finish with it again. So we went back to the 1970s. 49% of conflicts finished in a victory. That was down to 9% in the 2010s. Now, add to that, in the 1970s, 23% of conflicts finished with a peace agreement. That was down to only 4%. 4%. So that means 87% of all conflicts in the 2010s didn't come to a resolution. The age of the forever war. Now, also, as I mentioned earlier on, there's more conflicts now than any time since the Second World War. So 69 when we counted them last time. You combine that with 91 countries now which are involved in a conflict beyond their borders. That's the most since the inception of the Global Peace Index 20 years ago. So that means the prognosis that terrorism is more likely to increase. And remember, 98% of all terrorist deaths occur in a conflict zone. And that, my friends, is the end of the presentation.
Steve, thank you very, very much. No, thanks a lot. That was a very, very detailed tour de force throughout the world, and lots of important findings, lots of important numbers, but obviously all kinds of stories behind them. And let's move to questions and answers. And Steve, it's usually a very active crowd, so I'm going to do 3 questions at a time, if that's okay.
Okay, great.
So who wants to go first? Yes.
Hello. Thank you so much for the presentation. My name is David. I'm from the MAIS program. I'm from Colombia. And that was a very insightful presentation. Thank you so much. I was just wondering if you can please elaborate on how IEP gathers information and data points to develop these reports, and how can you ensure accuracy?
Sure, that's it.
Steve, I'm just gonna gather the question.
Oh, okay, that's okay. Okay.
That was a good methodological question. Yes, Wallace.
First of all, also thank you for a presentation about wonderful insights on terrorism globally. My name is Wallace. I'm also from MAIS 2 students here from Hong Kong. And my questions is about terrorism, because nowadays it's very difficult to define what's terrorism. Usually in the countries, maybe the name of national security, limited people's speech, and also the freedoms. So that's why, in your perspective, how would you define terrorism?
Sure, okay.
Thank you. And yes.
I'm Jacob from Austria, also a student here at the DA. And I was wondering if you could shed some light on the Sahel again and on the European side of things, because as you said, the French pulled out, and I wonder what the EU could do to help decrease terrorism in this region.
Yeah, no, that's a good question.
Thank you.
Right, will I go at it now?
Yes, now you may.
Okay, so we've got a variety of different data sources we use. So the source we use, and there's a couple of these different sources around, but the one we use for the terrorist attacks comes from an organisation called Dragonfly, which is based out of London. And so they've got data going back now about 25 years. And so that's what we use. Now, the way that data's developed is through the scouring of news articles globally. And so you build up from that the terrorist attacks. Now, what the data can never be 100% reliable, okay? That's you can't do it. And so particularly if the attacks occur and they get reported, because generally they get reported in the press, okay? If the people get killed, they generally get reported. There are lots, but if you're looking for ones which are happening where they're reported in languages which aren't very common, then sometimes you won't get them all. But generally the trends are pretty right. So there's various organisations around, intelligence organisations, which we deal with, and they'd say, yeah, well, our figures might be quite the same as yours, but basically all the trends and everything's in the same ballpark. So now we combine that with a whole lot of other data which we've got, which come together to produce the report, so we get a more rounded picture. So, definition of terrorism, yeah, great question. There is not a definition of terrorism which is globally agreed to. The UN's tried at it for about 50 years and got nowhere. So, the definition we use is an act of violence committed by a non-state actor for a political, religious or ideological purpose, where the aim of the attack is to send a message to a broader audience than those directly affected by the attack. And that's why, let's say in Colombia or Mexico, and that may change next year for Mexico, but in Colombia we wouldn't cause the deaths with the cartels. Occasionally there's some terrorism down there, you do get some, but not a great lot. Now that may change with Mexico, because the US government, this we'll have to discuss this one too, but this will get interesting. They've now put 12 different cartel groups on their terrorist list. Now, what that means now is, when we're looking at the data, what will be perceived as a terrorist attack or not a terrorist attack. Well, look, it'll be interesting to see how it goes. That also means that under the way the US is constituted, it sees itself as being able to go and launch attacks anywhere in the world on terrorists. So does that mean now they'll have assassination attempts into Mexico with drones? That's on various targets in their fight against fentanyl. That we need to see. Now, if we come back to the Sahel, so it's this stage it's very difficult to see where the influence is going. So if we're looking at Europe, and you'll know this probably much better than me, Europe is absorbed with the crisis in the Ukraine. Actual, how can I put it, the intellectual bandwidth to deal anywhere else is hard. It's trying to up the level of money it's likely to spend as a percentage of GDP on the military. It's got to get the money from somewhere. Okay, so that's causing cuts in aid. And military support, which they might have given to governments, that's now going into the Ukraine as well. And so that's going to play out over the next couple of years. From what I'm hearing, and I may not be right, but it's unlikely the war will finish this year. despite the best efforts of the US president. So it's now what that does mean, but is it means that the situation there is likely to get a lot worse. Russia itself, it's pulled some of its resources out of the Sahel, which they've got a group over there called the Bear Brigade, and that's one of their vital intelligence groups. They've pulled people out of that back up into the Donetsk region of Russia to support the intelligence efforts there in the fight back home. And again, when we come over and we look at the attacks in Iran and Russia, which are big, a lot of their intelligence efforts now are going into their respective wars, which makes it very, very hard. Now, having said all that, you've also got the three, Burkina Faso, Niger and Mali, pulled away from ECOWAS and don't want African Union troops. But I was speaking to someone in the last week who's got a back conversation into the government in Burkina Faso, and now they're starting to try and look for help. So maybe things will change, because the Russians aren't really interested and haven't got the resources to really fight a war against JNIM. And I think the government in Burkina Faso is seeing that, so maybe that might lead to a bit of change. But sorry, I haven't got anything too much to say. Mm-hmm.
Oh no, that was very insightful already. Let's move on to the second part. Yes, Kusaikov.
Yes. Hello, I come from Syria, and it's just
Oh, okay, great.
a comment and
Yeah. So you're probably across it better than me.
no. The comment is that you said that the terrorist organization HTS, which is in power now, brought SDF in order to try to fight ISIS. Actually, that could have been the truth until yesterday, when there was the constitutional declaration, and immediately the political office of SDF discarded the constitutional declaration, and they said
I do miss that. Wow.
they said it goes against everything that we have agreed with the terrorist Al-Sharaa. And Turkey actually announced that the agreement between HTS and SDF does not mean that they will stop
the attacks. Yeah.
They're what they call terrorist organizations, and they actually shelled areas in East Syria just yesterday.
Right. Oh, so thanks. That's new information for me. Yeah.
The question is, now we have a recognized terrorist organization in power by law, and its leader Al-Sharaa is also a recognized terrorist by the UN Security Council and the General Assembly. So Syria fell from the hands of a dictator to the hands of a terrorist. How would that reflect in the report, since you said that when an organization takes control over an area, it does not consider
that's right.
After the massacres that have been committed against the Alawites, thousands of people have been wiped out of
that's right.
in the past week. Thank you.
All right, great. Okay, that was probably a better answer than I could have given.
Thank you, Kusai. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Tobias. I'm also a second year my student here. My question would be, would you say that there is good cooperation between countries when it comes to countering terrorism? And would you say that good cooperation is also a good predictor to counter terrorism? Thank you.
Right, okay.
Thank you. And Pasha, you had your hand up, yeah.
Nice presentation, by the way. I'm Ibrahim, and I'm with the MICE 2 program here. My question boils down to the link between organized crime and then terrorism. So for the issue of opium smuggling in, say, Afghanistan, we all know that it goes to fund terrorist activities.
Yeah.
So how does that reflect in the index? And then aside from that, how do you, in the definitions of terrorism, how do you place, or where do you place the aid or the assistance garnered from organized crime? Thank you.
Right, okay, good one.
Those were three again.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so for the one with HTS, obviously they're not classified as a terrorist organisation because they're now the government. Okay,
Sorry to interrupt you, but they're not classified by who? By the report or by the international organization?
Yeah, the way generally when you're looking at terrorism and you're measuring, and this comes across all the intelligence agencies, you don't count governments, okay? Now, you may find that you'll refer to governments as terrorist governments and other sorts of things like that, but from a methodological perspective, including governments gets very, very hard and gets incredibly political if you're trying to produce a report which isn't political. So, for example, now, if we included governments, then you'd be including drone strikes, which Americans might have been carrying out in Afghanistan. You'd now include a whole range of other activities which are happening inside conflicts as well, and the politics of it is poisonous, okay? I'm being really honest with you, yeah, it's poisonous. So that's therefore the definitions and the way all organisations which are monitoring this stuff, it's non-state actors. Now, when you're doing that, sometimes you've got to come up with specialised lists, and then you'll only count a terrorist attack by an organisation which is defined as being a terrorist organisation. The ones we do are a little bit broader than that. So we look at a whole range of organisations. So someone, let's say, take the US State Department, because it's pretty comprehensive, and one's classified by the UN. So some of the reports, and that's the way they operate. But ours is a bit broader. I think we've got about 80 different terrorist organisations we're tracking. It'd be more than that, probably over 100. Where HTS goes, I don't know, okay? But one can look at it. It looked promising up to 3 days ago. It all seemed to be heading in the right direction. But if the SDF, the Kurds, have now thrown it out, then that's it. And certainly Turkey's not going to stop fighting the Kurds unless the army actually ends up getting merged into something like HTS. So HTS, one of its strongest supporters was Turkey. Cooperation on terrorism, it varies from country to country and the resources within it. So what you'd find is that generally between countries which are reasonably aligned, there's a lot of cooperation. You'd find, let's say between Russia and the US, and Russia and Europe, there'd be very little cooperation on terrorism. Very little. This stuff can also get quite poisonous, and I'm not going to go into details, but there'll be different countries which might support a terrorist group to support their own political agenda and outcomes, and even where they might be fighting that terrorist organisation, part of their organisation might be supporting them because they're undermining another state which as they see, which is a strategic value to it. So the cooperation gets pretty difficult. Now, if we're looking into the West and we're looking at the terrorism in the West, and we look at the cooperation between the various intelligence services there, it's very, very good and very, very strong. Now, organised crime and terrorism, that's exactly right. Like, and we look into, I'll come back to the Sahel because that's the one we've been talking about the most. So, separating acts which we'd see as organised crime and separating that from a terror jihadist organisation can get very, very hard. And then you'll find in that area what were organised crime operations now will say that they're jihadists, okay, because they're now coming in on something which now gives them a lot more leverage, if you like, because they get associated with the group. So they'll come join a group. They're still really criminal operations, don't necessarily have a lot of belief in it, but they'll now join the jihadist operation. So certainly when we're looking at JNIM, the way it finances itself, and this is pretty typical through any territory which any organisation controls. They'll have the past guns, illicit drugs, minerals, which might be extracted illegally, people smuggling, all of them as ways of being able to get money and boost their income. So the terrorist organisations or the jihadist organisations do the same.
Thank you. And then we can do one more round if you want to. Who wants to go for it? Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Christina. I'm studying economics, and my question is about the shift toward lone actors from group organization. Why is that? If the ultimate goal is still political in nature, it's very difficult to achieve any political substantial change if you are a lone actor and if you are probably dying in the terrorist attack you are carrying out. So why is this shift nowadays?
Thank you.
Hi, William, my student as well. And I just had a question actually about lone wolf terrorist attacks. What recommendations would IEP have for states suffering from this problem in terms of security measures? Is there anything that can be done that has not already been tried? Thank you.
Great. Then, since there is no third question, I may abuse my prerogatives as a chair. No, I want to ask you about Al-Shabaab a little bit because it appeared on your slides, and then rightfully you didn't focus on it because it is not the very deadliest one, but amongst them. And basically, two questions about it. So, number one. How do you see the development at the moment or in recent years? Because late 2010s, early 2020s, one thought, okay, that may actually go away, but they seem to have come back with quite forcefully. And two, perhaps also about counterterrorism. What's your opinion about counterterrorism? Because Al-Shabaab and Somalia in general is really there's this very noticeable correlation on the one hand between heavy-handed military measures against it, and that doesn't improve things, actually makes it worse.
Right, okay. So the first one was on lone actors and why the phenomena. So the phenomena is caused by a whole range of different things, and you're right, they're not going to change the state, but they are doing something in their head which they think needs to be done. The state needs to be attacked. Quite often they'll perceive that they're going to go to jail for it, or maybe even get killed for it. They will gain a level of notoriety, which gives them a sense of fame and things like that. But if we come back and we look at the underlying reasons for it, they're complex. So what we've got is we're getting more and more people disillusioned with governments and with society as in general. You've got the social media algorithms radicalised. They've got these what's termed radicalised social media algorithms. And so the algorithms themselves are getting more and more sophisticated. So it'll step you down a path when you look at something to show more content which will get emotional response in you, so you'll watch more. So the idea is to keep you on the platform as long as you can. So those algorithms are actually getting better and better and better. I had a meeting with the guy in Meta about 12 months ago who headed up all their taking down of hate speech and violent content. Okay, so met him in London, so he's based out of London. So we're debating all this, and each time I'd make a suggestion about something they do, he says, "Yeah, that's a great idea, but we can't do it. Yeah, that's a great idea, but we can't do it." We got round to the end, and I said, "Well, look, why don't you look?" When you see someone going down these tunnels more and more and more, why don't you put out something which is positive, something positive, to try and break the cycle? And the guy looked me in the eyes. He says, "We can't play with the algorithms." So, yeah. So that's the state of that. But if we're looking now, what we can see is the Gaza war. That's caused a lot of people to get So that's been a driver for committing more acts, and I think that increase from 32 to 52 attacks, a lot of that has to do with the issue in the West with the issues related to the Gaza war, and we can see spikes in that everywhere. So that's one of the driving things, and I think the other thing which is driving behind it as well is that the economic conditions aren't good. They're only going to probably get worse in Europe over the next few years, and I think that's going to cause even a lot more alienation and dissatisfaction with the system. So now back to what can security agencies do about it? So obviously there's a limited number of resources which security can throw at it to track it. So they've got all sorts of ways of and machine learning algorithms and such to be able to trace this kind of stuff, and then sort of to cross match it with all sorts of different arrays of information. So they can get into all the social engines, so be able to see what's there and try to match it out. But the problem is false positives. There's only so many you can deal with, and with the radicalisation happening faster, it's harder. So it's more of a there's only so far the security can go with it. So it's more of a whole of society approach which is really needed, and that's back to sort of the alienation of a lot of people within society, being able to get more inclusiveness, and I don't like the word inclusiveness much, but I'll use it, more inclusiveness for the people who are most marginalised, and try in some way of getting them back in. A lot of the inequities within societies need to probably be addressed, and also there needs to be better programs from the government and better approaches from the press, rather than sort of trying to create the fractionalisation to try and work out how do you bring people together in social cohesion. It gets hard. So Al-Shabaab, the number of people, reason we didn't focus on it much this time is because the number of people they're killing has actually been decreasing over the last couple of years now. That doesn't mean that they've gone away or anything like that. When we're looking at Somali, they control a lot of territory and seem to have the support of the people in those territories as well. So I don't think they're going anywhere. But the number of people they're killed from terrorism isn't quite as high. So that's about all I'd say on it, other than sort of if we're looking at Somali. What we find is they've got a number of autonomous territories there, such as Puntland and Somaliland. We can see that they're interested in building a port there. Ethiopia is interested in putting a line. I don't know what they're going to do as transport, but to create a port there so that now that, because it's a landlocked country, so now that they've got sea access. So that's obviously quite contentious with the Somali government and with its neighbours as well. So we'll have to see where that goes. I can't really see it going anywhere. And counter-terrorism, so the last one. So we start to think of counter-terrorism like these groups are violent. Okay, and so it gets very, very hard to do anything without having some sort of effective kinetic force. So it gets really hard. But on the other hand is that for them to exist, they exist within a society and within an area, and generally they'll have some reasonable level of support. So the two concepts in it, if you like. One is how do you create the societal resilience so society doesn't fall into violence. And that's another whole body of work which we do at the Institute for Economics and Peace, and we'd call that positive peace. Now, once you've got the resilience within a society, now you're not going to get a lot of acts of violence happening within the society, and there's a whole way of looking at that. Now, if you're looking at Western Europe, that's actually falling away. So if we're looking at the measures of positive peace in Europe, they've been falling away now over the last decade or so. especially since COVID. So now, one hand you need coercive forces, but it needs to be well targeted. And on the other hand, you need to be able to build up alternatives as well. And so this comes back to well-functioning government. But generally, it's the coercive forces which knock it out. So, but they don't seem to ever be able to get rid of them entirely. For that, you need a peace agreement. And so, for a peace agreement, if an organisation which is very happy using violence hasn't got anything to stop them, they'll just keep using the violence because it's an effective mechanism for being able to get what you want. But at a point when they're suffering enough, then at that point they are likely to start to think and look at doing a peace deal. Now we can look at Colombia, what happened there with FARC, and we can argue about how successful or unsuccessful it is, but that's an example of where you have the really strong kinetic force, and then the people are thinking, well, maybe it's time to do a deal. But we don't see groups like Islamic State doing that, do we? No. So I don't know, that wasn't much of an answer, but...
No, Steve, thanks a lot. I mean, there was a lot of super interesting information, and I think one of the things that I admire the most is that you sometimes use these actually quite lofty social science concepts like positive peace, Galtung, and you manage to operationalize that, so to measure it, and with that there are all kinds of important causal processes involved. Yeah, because as you said, and I fully agree with you, that positive peace really is something that protects, at least not to slide towards the absence of negative peace. Yeah, but it's obviously alarming then to hear when you say that the measures of positive peace are declining too, even though it's quite plausible if we look at the world in front of us. So even on that, yeah.
Yeah, I was just about to say, if you're looking at the positive peace in Europe, you'll find that the functioning of government's been falling off. You'll find that corruption is on the increase, and the free flow of information, or the flow of information in a number of areas, like that's the control of the press and such, have deteriorated as well. They're the main ones, just off the top of my head.
Yeah. No, so on that a little bit depressing note, but nevertheless, was a great talk. Thanks so much for being here, and sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. Thank you.
So thanks for all the questions. I've got another meeting at 3:30, I think it is. So I'm going to have to run. I'm going to have to run.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's. I'll just hang on, just double.